Welcome. How many people are at this meeting for the very first time? Nice. Welcome. This meeting is a little different from other big book meetings, and I shall explain. Does anybody need a big book? Good idea to have a big book in a big book meeting. Come up. There's one right here. Just return them when we're done. We'll start with the format of this meeting. The format of this meeting is a little, like I said, unlike other big book meetings, and that is that instead of reading chapter 5 or chapter 3 in the beginning, we do an overview of the big book. So you know exactly why we're reading, what we're reading tonight, and how it fits in to the big book and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because that confused me when I was new. We just start reading some chapter and I was like, whatever, right? But I like the idea of kind of doing an overview each week so we know why we're where we're at, okay? Now, during the reading, there's only one person that reads. That would be me. But during the reading, we encourage crosstalk. So if there's something like you don't know what Armistice Day or something, just shout it out. What's Armistice Day? You don't need to raise your hand or be called on or anything. Just shout it out. I don't understand that. What's, there's a lot of words that we use that could be confusing, or phrases that may not make sense during the reading. Just shout it out. You can say, I didn't get that. Can you reread that or whatever? Okay, it's kind of like we're sitting on the couch with somebody going over it. Got it? Good. All right. So let's review. This is the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's called the book Alcoholics Anonymous, but we call it the big book because one of our very first editions, we put it on very big paper. But if you're new, this is our book. Sometimes you get the book and you go, that's awfully big. I'm not reading that. This part's stories. This is the 164 pages, the beginning of the book, which outlines the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, okay? The story is very important, and they change with each of our 4 editions. This is the program outlined in the first 164 pages of the book, okay? Now, out of the 4 different editions of the big book, it's not in here, if you want to read any of the stories that were taken out of the first, second, or third edition, you can get the book called Experience, Strength, and Hope. That has all the stories that were in the first, second, and third edition that were taken out. So this part changes with each edition. We take some stories out. Sometimes we add some new ones. This part doesn't change, okay? And that's what we're going to be reading. Now, out of that, the very first part of the page in the book, it's going to have a contents page. This outlines the whole 164, or these smaller books that we've got, all right? In the very beginning of the book, the preface says, the first 164 pages, we don't change. And we hope when you read this, you go, oh, I felt like that. I think this might work for me. Me too, right? Then we've got the forwards for each of our 4 editions. The very first one, in the first page, says, this book is going to show you precisely how we have recovered. That's the main purpose of this book. So there's clear-cut directions in this book. Unlike some of the suggestions or good ideas or things you hear in a meeting, like 90 meetings in 90 days. That's not a direction out of the book, but it's a good suggestion, right? The second edition, we throw in some history. Talks about how our founders met and some of the big events that happened for us to come to where we're at today, and how we've grown over the years. The book starts here at the doctor's opinion. Guess what we're reading tonight? Oh! Hence, the doctor's coat and stethoscope tonight. So, when we read how it works, at the end of the steps, usually you'll hear us say, our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures make clear 3 pertinent ideas. A, oh my gosh, I'm an alcoholic. No human power has been able to get me sober. Something bigger than me is going to have to work. Right? God could and would if he were sought. Those are the premises for steps 1 and 2. Admitted I'm powerless over alcohol, my life's unmanageable, and that something bigger than me is going to help restore me to sanity. So A, B, and C are steps 1 and 2. The original manuscript, which is always up front if anybody wants to look at it, said, if you're not convinced of these 3 pertinent ideas, A, B, and C, read the book up until this point again, or throw it away. But being convinced, you're now at step 3. So everything up until chapter 5 is basically steps 1 and 2. Starts off with the doctor, what we're going to read tonight. So in the doctor's opinion, we don't go to our hairdresser and go, is this a cavity? Right? We go to somebody that specializes in that field, like a dentist. So we want to know, what is this allergy? What is this thing called alcoholism? So we went to Dr. Silkworth. It's not Dr. Bob, one of our founders. It's kind of like the doctor down at the ER. That every time he sees us, he goes, oh, you again. Sorry, we don't have a pill that'll fix you. You have this allergy. You're irritable, restless, and discontent. Nothing we've got can fix you, but whatever these men have to say seems to work, right? And that's the good doctor's opinion, and we're going to read that tonight. Then it starts off with Bill, our first founder. He tells a story like in a speaker meeting. He talks about crossing the line, right? He talks about depression. One more time he tried. He thought self-knowledge was going to do it, and then, oh, why do I keep doing this over and over, until the message was carried to him and the importance of carrying it to another. If you haven't related there, and there is a solution, chapter 2, we all chime in and we go, a lot of us felt just like Bill. You might be one of us. We're people that normally wouldn't mix. But in this scenario, we seem to have one common thing, and we have a solution for it. We're like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde when we drink. Don't worry about it. Come along for the ride. More about alcoholism. We read it in a meeting, right? It starts off with nobody wanted to admit they were real alcoholics, right? None of us really came in here going, yes, right? But just like in a participation meeting, we've got a couple different stories. So we got Jim the car salesman, Fred the accountant. We talk about the jaywalker, and maybe in there you might go, oh my God, that's me, right? Up until this, we've talked a little bit about spirituality. So we have a whole chapter dedicated to don't overthink the God thing, all right? You seem to lack that power to do this by yourself, right? So there must be a power bigger than you out there that's going to help you get sober. If you got a God, good. If you don't worry about it. Just don't overthink it. That's what that whole chapter is about. You lack that power. Come along, let us show you how we do it. And then we start with the steps in chapter 5. A, B, and C. If you're convinced of steps 1 and 2 so far, then you're at 3. And then after 3, we're going to do an inventory. We're going to talk about resentment, fear, and sex, and learn some facts about ourselves, that pain that's so deep you can't swallow to get to it. Chapter 6, into action, is where we get a sponsor. And read our inventory, learn some character defects, find out the amends we got to make, and clear up the wreckage of our past, as well as keep ourselves in check with 10 and meditation in 11. And then in chapter 7, working with others, is step 12. So those are directions on how we talk to a newcomer. We don't criticize. We don't talk down to them from any spiritual or moral hilltop, right? And we offer to help them through the steps. Now, when we wrote this book in 1939, it wasn't just alcoholics that were going to pick this up. So we have a chapter to the wives. Really good stuff. It's almost like an introduction to Al-Anon, but it also describes 4 different stages of an alcoholic, all the way to he's got to be hospitalized and, leaving Las Vegas, to he might be periodic and not think he's got a problem, okay? A lot of good information in there. And then once we get sober, we're still a little nuts with our family and people at home. So we've got a whole chapter to the family and what we deal with after we've gotten sober at home. And if you're an employer and you got a drunk one of us, or you've got a drunk one returning, this is some of the things you might encounter. And a vision for you, we hear it in a meeting, right? When people read it at the end of a meeting, it's the last part of it where Bill sums everything up. And it's basically saying, we only have 2 and 3 years sober when we wrote this book. Here's our book, Don't Die. We realize we know only a little, right? And then the first story is always Dr. Bob's Nightmare, our second founder. Any questions so far? Are we excited? All right, so we're going to be in the doctor's opinion. Dr. William Silkworth. So, like I said, this guy's got some creds. I'm the kind of person that when I watch late night TV and I see somebody trying to sell me like facial cream, I'm like, they're an actor. They don't know what they're talking about. But if I'm an alcoholic, or I'm not sure that I'm an alcoholic, and this doctor starts telling me stuff, I'm like, what does he know? But at the time, he's the only doctor in the only hospital that specialized in drug and alcohol addiction. Not only that, he was the chief physician. Dr. William Silkworth, he was called little blue-eyed man that loved drunks, and he helped almost 40 to 50,000 alcoholics in his time, which is pretty impressive. So this is from the doctor's opinion, his medical opinion about us. There's 2 different letters here. The first is us talking. We of Alcoholics Anonymous believe that the reader will be interested in the medical estimate of a plan of recovery described in this book. Convincing testimony must surely come from the medical men who have had experience with the sufferings of our members and have witnessed our return to health. A well-known doctor, chief physician, so he's got some creds, right? At a nationally prominent hospital specializing in alcohol and drug addiction, gave Alcoholics Anonymous this letter. That hospital was Charles Towns Hospital in New York. So in his first letter, to whom it may concern, I have specialized in the treatment of alcoholism for many years. In late 1934, I attended a patient who, though he had been a competent businessman, he's talking about Bill Wilson, our first founder. A competent businessman of good earning capacity was an alcoholic of a type I had come to regard as hopeless. In the course of his third treatment, he acquired certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. As part of his rehabilitation, he commenced to present his conceptions to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with still others. This has become the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of these men and their families. This man and over 100 others have appeared to have recovered. I personally know scores of cases who were of the type with whom other methods had failed completely. These facts appear to be of extreme medical importance because of the extraordinary possibility of rapid growth inherent in this group. They may well mark a new epoch in the annals of alcoholism. I never get that right, really? Nobody has a question on that one? Okay, so in other words, he's saying, in the publications that are going to come out this year, this might be a really big point, a big newsworthy event to write about in that year's publications, okay? That's basically what he's saying. These men may well have a remedy for thousands of such situations. You may rely absolutely on anything they say about themselves. Sincerely, MD. Now, you'll notice in the book it says Dr. William Silkworth. In the first edition, it just says MD. Because although he loved us, he wasn't quite sure of this venture we were putting out. So he just was like, oh, just put... By the second edition, he added his name. That's kind of cool, huh? So now right in between here, it's all of us kind of chiming in. We're like the only ones sober in the United States. We're in Ohio, New York, and we're getting together to write this book, right? And we go, you know, the physician, Dr. Silkworth, who at our request gave us this letter, has been kind enough to enlarge upon his views in another statement which follows in the second letter. In this statement, he confirms what we who have suffered alcoholic torture must believe, that the body of an alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind. It didn't satisfy us to be told that we could not control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life, that we were in full flight from reality, or we were outright mental defectives. I kind of feel like we already knew that. We're kind of okay with it in a way, right? We already know we're a little bubble off from center when we drink. These things were true to some extent, in fact, to a considerable extent with some of us, but we are sure that our bodies were sickened as well. Our belief, any picture of the alcoholic which leaves out this physical factor, is incomplete. The doctor's theory that we have an allergy to alcohol interests us. As laymen, not doctors, our opinion as to its soundness may, of course, mean little, but as ex-problem drinkers, we can say that his explanation makes good sense. It explains many things for which we cannot otherwise account. Though we work out our solution on a spiritual as well as an altruistic plane, which means a selfless plane, we favor hospitalization for the alcoholic who is jittery or befogged. Anybody know why the alcohol... Usually when I work with somebody in the book, this is one of the times that I'll bring up. Do you know why somebody's shaky when they come into a meeting? Detoxing from the alcohol. Withdraws from the sugar. It's sugar. So we used to give them a spoonful of peanut butter, spoonful of honey, sometimes a shot. It's one of the things that, I mean, my heart stopped when I was trying to not drink, but twice. It wasn't going to kill me. So when you see somebody shaking, FYI, in a meeting, and they're new, and they're jittery, don't give them a cup of coffee. It makes it a little worse. Give them something that doesn't have caffeine with a whole lot of sugar or a whole lot of honey in it. And you just keep sipping that, because that's that, I'm not going to do it, I'm not going to drink, I'm not going to drink, and then 3 o'clock in the morning you're like, I can't stand it anymore. If you let them know that if they drink a lot of sugar up until those first couple days, it'll help with those jitters, okay? But we do favor hospitalization for the person that's ready to go into grand mal seizures, right? FYI. More often than not, it's imperative that a man's brain be cleared before he's approached. He has then a better chance at understanding and accepting what we have to offer, right? The person's still a little cloudy. We don't go up to him and go, gotta read the book, gotta go to this meeting, gotta do this. And they're like, can I just get my court card signed? So this is the doctor's second letter, okay? Goes like this. The subjects presented in this book seem to me to be of paramount importance to those afflicted with alcohol addiction. I say this after many years of experience as a medical director in one of the oldest hospitals in the country treating alcohol and drug addiction. There was, therefore, a sense of real satisfaction when I was asked to contribute a few words on the subject which is covered so masterfully in detail in these pages. We doctors have realized for a long time that some form of moral psychology was of urgent importance to these alcoholics, but its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. What with all our ultramodern standards, our scientific approach to everything, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside of our synthetic knowledge. So what's synthetic? Man-made, right. So in other words, we don't have a pill to fix what you got. No matter how much doctoring we do, we just can't seem to figure out, if you got a broken arm, we can put a cast on it. But I don't have something that's going to fix what you got. You need some sort of moral psychology, something in the way that our spirit interprets life and acts, the way we think, right? Basically, we need a spiritual slap on the head, and he doesn't know how to do that. Okay? Any questions? So he's talking about Bill now. Many years ago, one of the leading contributors of this book came under our care in the hospital, and while he was here, he acquired some ideas which he put into practical application at once. Later, he requested the privilege of being allowed to tell his story to other patients here, and with some misgiving, we consented. Can you imagine us going down here to Harbor General going, can we walk around and talk to anybody that's in there drunk? They're like, no. But he did let him do that. The cases which followed have been most interesting. In fact, many of them are amazing. The unselfishness of these men, as we have come to know them, the entire abstinence of profit motive and their community spirit is indeed inspiring to one who has labored long and weary in this alcoholic field. They believe in themselves and still more in a power which pulls the chronic alcoholic back from the gates of death. Of course, an alcoholic ought to be freed from his physical craving for liquor, and this often requires definite hospital procedure before psychological measures can be of maximum benefit. So we believe, we doctors, and so suggest a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is the manifestation of an allergy. This phenomenon of craving, phenomena. There's a Muppet song that just sounds like they're saying phenomena. Anybody on my Facebook that ever sees that posted, you'll know why. So, this phenomenon of craving. Has anybody ever had a craving in here? All right. Almost. So you guys know what a craving is? Yeah? Oh, a lot of heads nodding. All right. So this phenomenon, this unknown craving that you guys get, never happens in normal people. Huh? So is that enough for me to go, well, hold on, maybe I am an alcoholic. I get that, right? It's the doctor's opinion that this phenomenon of craving is limited to us alcoholics and never occurs in the average tempered drinker. The allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form. Once having formed the habit, they found they cannot break it. Once having lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. Frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. Yes. I had to read this like 3 times. Years later, I still didn't know. I'm like, whatever, just keep reading. Frothy emotional appeal. How many people have had the doctor tell them, if you keep drinking, your liver's going to go, or you're going to get, yeah. My heart stopped. They restarted my heart, and I'm like, whatever, right? Or family members have begged and asked you not to drink, right? Or the employer says, you're going to lose your job if you drink again. And you know on a cappuccino, that froth on the top? If you blow on it, it's like, whatever. And that's what we do when people come up and approach us about our drinking. Whether it's a doctor, a family member, some close person, we're like, whatever, right? Frothy, emotional appeal, asking us to stop, doesn't work with us, right? The message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. In nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives. So, depth and weight. I usually there talk about the fact that if we're learning how to share, even if you've got a couple days sober, in order for our message to have depth and weight, sometimes I would go to a meeting and you'd hear somebody just talk about how wonderful it is and tell me how it needs to be done and how, but I'm just like, whatever, right? Or you hear somebody's drunk-a-log forever with no solution or hope. And sometimes I might laugh, but I might not get as much out of it. But how do you do this, right? So in order for the message to have both depth and weight, we have to share both. So I usually say to practice, if you're doing 5 minutes, 2 minutes in, you should be drunk and come into AA. And after that, even if you got a week sober, you can say, this is what I've been doing. I've been putting my hand out to new people. I got a sponsor. I'm not sure what or how to do the steps. You know what I mean? If you do 10 minutes, do 5 and 5. But somewhere in the middle, I still till this day, when I speak somewhere, I'll gauge. When I do a 45 or whatever, I gauge it half and half. Somewhere halfway there, I'm heading into what recovery's about, okay? But then the message has depth and weight, because then I know you've walked where I've walked, and I might listen. And it always reminds me of the lady that walked up to me and she goes, my grandfather died of alcoholism and he turned yellow before he died. I'm like, whatever, woman. Why is she telling me this? With my bright yellow eyes and gray skin. But if that same woman would have walked up to me and said, I got to go. I'm going to an AA meeting. I drank a lot before, and I even turned yellow when I was drinking, but I don't drink anymore. So it was nice meeting you. You know what I mean? I would have not let her go. It has a whole different meaning when I'm like, wait, my eyes are yellow. How did you do it? So frothy emotional appeal doesn't work with us. The message has to have depth and weight, and it usually has to come from one who's walked where we've walked, right? So now remember, in these days, doctors were putting us in hospitals and sticking needles in our eyeballs and doing frontal lobotomies and all this crazy stuff and locking us there. They didn't know what to do with us, right? So Dr. Silkworth came under a lot of scrutiny from other doctors, and he's like, if any feel that as a psychiatrist directing a hospital for alcoholics, we appear somewhat sentimental, let them stand on the firing lines. Let them see the tragedies, the despairing wives, the little children. Let solving these problems become part of their daily work and even their sleepless moments. And even the most cynical will not wonder why we have accepted and encouraged the movement, AA. We feel that after many years of experience, that we have found nothing which has contributed more to the rehabilitation of these men, these alcoholics, than the altruistic, the selfless movement that is now growing up amongst them. The doctor continues and says, men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. Duh. This sensation, so elusive that, they admit it's injurious. They cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. All right, so my heart stopped, but it's not going to kill me. So I might admit that it's bad for me, but I really don't think that I'm going to stop or I can stop. And I don't even know whether my lies or my truths or what my real stories are anymore, right? To them, the alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontent, unless they can again experience the ease and comfort which comes from taking a few drinks. Drinks they see which others take with impunity, with ease. After they've succumbed to the desire again, as many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful, with the firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over. Unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there is little hope of his recovery. So now the difference between a mental obsession, the mental obsession, I want to drink, I got to drink, right, is before we take the drink. After we take the drink, the phenomenon of craving sets in, and then that's when the cycle starts and we can't stop, right? When they say we have no defense against the first drink, it's a telltale sign for a relapse mode, whether we've got some time or we don't. But if we're irritable, restless, and discontent, right? You've taken away my alcohol. It's been 43 days and I haven't had a drink, right? But I've got nothing else to replace it. I'm going to be pissed. I'm going to be irritable, restless, and discontent, and that balloon will pop one way or another. And it usually is the ease and comfort that comes with that drink. And the only other solution that gives us a defense against that is a spiritual solution, a spiritual slap on the head. Now, it's interesting, he mentions an entire psychic change. In the back of the book where it talks about a spiritual experience, it says, a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery is enough to have a spiritual experience. Okay? When he wrote these letters, we didn't quite have the names for the steps and things like that yet. So, unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, spiritual change, very little hope for his recovery. But on the other hand, and as strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, that very same person who seemed doomed, who has had many problems, he despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol. The only effort necessary is required to follow a few simple rules. Basically the steps, right? So men and women have cried out to me in sincere and despairing appeal, "Doctor, I can't go on like this. I have everything to live for. I must stop, but I cannot. You must help me." Faced with this problem, if a doctor's honest with himself, he must sometimes feel his own inadequacy. Although he gives all that's in him, it's often not enough. One feels that something more than human power, remember, A, B, and C. Oh my God, I might be an alcoholic with this allergy. No human power, frothy emotional appeal. It's beyond the doctor's human power to be able to help me, right? Something beyond that human power is needed to produce the essential psychic change. Though the aggregate, the building blocks, the beginning of recoveries resulting from psychiatric effort is considerable, we physicians must admit that we have made little impression upon the problem as a whole. Many types do not respond to the ordinary psychological approach. Did it work with anybody going just to see a therapist before coming to the program sometimes? So I do not hold to those who believe that alcoholism is entirely a problem of mental control. I have had many men who had, for example, worked a period of months on some problem or business deal which was to be settled on a certain date favorable to them. They took a drink a day or so prior to that date, and then the phenomenon at once became paramount to all other interests, so that the important appointment was not met. These men were not drinking to escape. They were drinking to overcome a craving beyond their mental control. Now, there are many situations which arise out of the phenomenon of craving which cause men to take the supreme sacrifice rather than continue to fight. Suicide or alcoholic death, right? The classification of alcoholics seems most difficult, and in much detail is outside the scope of this book. There are, of course, the psychopaths that are emotionally unstable. We are all familiar with this type. They're always going on the wagon for keeps. They are over-remorseful and make many resolutions, but never a decision. There is the type of man who is unwilling to admit that he cannot drink. He plans various ways of drinking. He changes his brand or his environment. There is the type who always believes that after being entirely free from alcohol for a period of time, he can take a drink without danger. There is the manic-depressive type who is perhaps the least understood by his friends and whom a whole chapter could be written. When the doctor wrote this, remember, we were going into wards and hospital units with people that were dealing with extreme mental issues that were not alcoholism, but they had nowhere to put us. So kind of separating that made it a little difficult, okay? Then, there are the types entirely normal. That would be us, right? No. Except in every respect except in the effect alcohol has upon them. They are often able, intelligent, and friendly people. That's us, right? Okay. All these and many others have one symptom in common. They cannot start drinking without developing the phenomenon of craving. It doesn't matter how I drink, whether I sporadically drink, whether I drink alone, whether I drink in the bars, whether I drink in, wreck cars and go into fights and whatever. There's one thing I do have in common. If there was a cart of alcohol here, we would all be going back there for the next drink, right? The phenomenon, as we have suggested, may be a manifestation of an allergy, which differentiates these people and sets them apart as a distinct entity. It has never been, by any treatment with which we are familiar, permanently eradicated, eliminated. The only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence. This immediately precipitates us into a seething cauldron of debate. That's like the witch that stirs the kettle into the seething cauldron with all these things. It's like when we get into an argument and everybody's got an opinion, right? Much has been written, pro and con, but among physicians, the general opinion seems to be that most chronic alcoholics are doomed. Thank you, good doctor. Had anybody found the A, B, and C in there when we read it? A, oh my gosh, I might have this allergy, I might be an alcoholic. B, whether I went to church or I did this or I went to the doctor or people asked me to, I just have not been able to stop my own human aid. Something bigger than me is going to have to work. I'm going to need something other than what the doctors and other people have been already trying to get me to do, right? So, the next page. Now remember when we wrote this, some of us were already sober. There's two of our founders that he talks about here. The first one is Hank Pankhurst, okay? He wrote The Unbeliever. It was the first story ever taken out of the big book, but he also wrote To the Employers. Bill would say, some people would say, that the big book wouldn't have been written without Bill Wilson, but it wouldn't have been published without Hank. He was a salesman, and he got us the funding in order to get the book up there, right? The second person is Fitz, who you can still read about in the big book, and he wrote the story Our Southern Friend, okay? So the good doctor goes on to say, what is the solution? Perhaps I can best answer this by relating one of my own experiences with two of you guys. About 1 year prior to this experience, a man, Hank Pankhurst, was brought to be treated for chronic alcoholism. He had partially recovered from a gastric hemorrhage, and it seemed to be a case of pathological mental deterioration. He had lost everything worthwhile in life and was only living, one might say, to drink. He frankly admitted and believed that for him there was no hope. Following the elimination of alcohol, there was found to be no permanent brain injury. He accepted the plan outlined in this book. 1 year later, he called to see me, and I experienced a very strange sensation. I knew the man by name and partially recognized his features, but there all resemblance ended. From a trembling, despairing, nervous wreck had emerged a man brimming over with self-reliance and contentment. I talked with him for some time, but was not able to bring myself to feel I had known him before. To me, he was a stranger, and so he left me. A long time has passed with no return to alcohol. Do you ever hear people say, some people see the change in us over that first year before we see it? And they saw us come in and we're like totally different when we take our cake? So, kind of what he's saying. Second one, and then when I need a mental uplift, I think of Fitz, right? I often think of another case brought in by a physician prominent in New York. The patient had made his own diagnosis and decided his situation hopeless, had hidden away in a deserted barn determined to die. He was rescued by a searching party and, in desperate condition, brought to me. Following his physical rehabilitation, he had a talk with me in which he frankly stated he thought the treatment was a waste of effort unless I could assure him, which no one ever had, that in the future he would have the willpower to resist the impulse to drink. His alcoholic problem was so complex his depression so great that we felt his only hope would be through what we then called moral psychology. In other words, he called those of us in the program AA at the time. And we doubted even you guys could help him, right? And we doubted even that would have any effect. However, he did become sold on the ideas contained in this book. He's not had a drink for a great many years. I see him now and then, and he's a fine specimen of manhood, as one could ever wish to meet. So me as a doctor, I earnestly advise every alcoholic to read this book through and through. Perhaps he came to scoff, right? Maybe you picked it up and went, that's not for me. You know, when we peek, oh, I'm not an alcoholic, I don't need to read that. And we go in a closet and we go, what did he say? So maybe you came to scoff. Hopefully, you'll remain to get that spiritual answer. You may remain to pray. Sincerely, William D. Silkworth, MD. Yay! That is the doctor's opinion.